Welcome back, guys. So today I have a pretty awesome guest, my dear and beloved friend, Aryan Aliyah Kabarian. So Aryan graduated from the University of Texas at Dallas back in December of 2022. Aryan is now working for Lockheed Martin as a systems engineer, and he had also been interning for them for the past year and a half. And now he is currently getting his master's degree. So, with that being said, thank you so much for joining.
Of course, a pleasure to be here and spread some of my wisdom.
I guess the first question would be is, a basic job description and things like that. So I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. So my name is Aryan. I work for Lockheed Martin in the commercial civil side of the business. So I'm not on the military side. I mainly support Orion as a loads and dynamics engineer. However, we recently got rebranded to the Moon to Mars loads and dynamics because we support other contracts as well as like SLD and Draco. And so we got quite a bit on our plates. As a loads engineer, kind of do a variety of stuff. The coolest of which being I do test support. So, flight hardware that we're testing, I get to kind of go and see. It's primarily like vibration tests where they get the hatch for Artemis 4 put on a table, shake it to like 2000 hertz. Is it within the limits we're expecting it to be? Or are the components going to get annihilated just to kind of simulate the flight conditions, right?
Okay.
The coolest part, I've been getting into spectral work, which is NASA wants Artemis 2 to stay on the pad for an additional 60 days. And it's rated for 64 days now. So it's like doing analysis, like fatigue analysis, essentially. What's going to happen if we have fuel in here for this long? What happens if we don't have fuel in here? What are the wind cycles going to do? Stuff like that. So
the thing that I was always trying to figure out about systems engineering, but like coding, right? So I guess on a day-to-day basis, how much do you have to code? What languages do you typically use?
So let me make this distinction right now. I have a mechanical badge at work. So I'm badged as a mechanical engineer, and most of my work falls within that. However, there are some system influences like working on basis of estimates or like doing bids and stuff for NASA. So there's some tasks I do that are related to system engineering, but I'm mainly mechanical. So as somebody that deals with load stuff, you tend to use a lot of MATLAB.
Okay.
Which is interesting. As far as systems engineering goes, so I'm in grad school pursuing my master's in systems, and Python seems to be the way to go so far. Granted, I'm studying like model-based systems engineering, so it's like kind of like Creo, but like making the block diagrams and seeing how different subcomponents and different subteams and subsystems are going to fit in within the system of systems, right?
Right.
They're different, but at the same time, we're building this bridge. We need to have this many pillars. It's going to cost this much to make these pillars. It's going to cost this much in weight. How much should we space it out? Kind of similar to mechanical engineering work, but more so like the business aspect of it. Like, what is the most optimum way we can build this to save the most money or to be most cost efficient rather than, having 20 trucks on there, So it's more looking at it from that perspective rather than the engineering perspective we're used to, or the technical perspective that we're used to.
A lot of mechanical engineers want to go into aerospace engineering, but the path might not be easy, right? So if we can talk a little bit about the path that you took to get to where you're at now, as far as companies that you were working with, and certain paths that might lead you to success as far as working for an aerospace company versus others.
Sure. So I guess I can start with my personal journey. It's a bit of a long story, but met this kid in university physics back when I was getting my associates, and he had a cousin that worked for Lockheed Martin, and I was like, "Oh, that's sick! Like, how do you do that?"
Right.
And then he introduced me to SWE, which is Society of Women in Engineering, which I know I've preached to you about quite a bit back when we were in school.
Yeah.
And essentially, they have an annual conference. And SWE is not the only one. There's a variety of different societies you can join, and they have annual internship or career fairs. And in 2019, I flew to Anaheim, California for the SWE event I attended. And I was a pretty average student, had a 3.5 GPA, prior internship experience, just some projects and stuff on my resume. And, flew there, put my suit on, and attended the conference. And the way that's set up is you have a whole bunch of different companies that have different booths. You walk up to them with your resume, you give them your resume, you got 30 seconds to talk. It's your elevator pitch, right? Hi, my
Right.
name is Aryan. I'm a mechanical engineering student at the University of Texas Dallas, and I'm interested in this. I've done this. And I got 5 offers for internships. And they're in a variety of different fields, right? One was in automotive, one was in military space, one was in aviation. And I was like, cool, I don't know what I want to do when I graduate, as most of us don't. And they were kind of all over the country too. So I figured, you know what? I'm just going to say yes to everybody that gives me an offer, and I'm going to go home and figure out what's what. So I decided to just take a whole year off, and I accepted my offer with United Airlines to see what aviation's like, and then
Mhm.
Lockheed Martin to see what space is like, and Denso to see what automotive is like, because I wanted to do cars, right? That's the whole reason I got into mechanical.
We'll get into that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so that was kind of it. And after that, I ended up doing Lockheed Martin, which I loved, but it was on the military side. And as somebody who's born in the Middle East, I don't know how much I could grow in that industry. 'Cause, you have to get a security clearance, and
Right.
I would imagine it would be a very lengthy process. I may be eligible, I may not be. I don't know. I've never
Yeah.
attempted to get one, but that was my in for Lockheed. They have they grade their systems on a scale of like 0 to 4, and if you get like a 2.7 or above, you basically like in. They want you, and I ended up grading like 3.7 out of 4 in that internship. And my manager happened to quit like the week after my internship ended, so I was kind of homeless. During that time, I had a mentor at Lockheed, and he was one of the higher ups. And I was like, hey man, like I would like to work for Lockheed, but I want to be in Texas because I'm from Texas, and Huntsville, Alabama's sick and all. I'd rather be home for a little bit, at least when I start my career. So he put me in touch with a few different people, and I talked to them. And one of them was in Grand Prairie for MFC, which is a different business area of Lockheed. Um, when I was going to Texas for a day essentially, and met up with him and got coffee with the guy, gave him my resume. I was like, hey, my name is Aryan, like please hire me. Um, and that was kind of it. And then some time went by. I applied for a different position with Lockheed for an internship, and I was in the process of interviewing for that, where the recruiters told me, "Hey, we can no longer interview you because there's a pending offer." And that's how I got into Loads and Dynamics.
Okay.
So one of the managers just scooped me up, and he owned many different teams like aeronautics, propulsion, loads. And he was like, "Hey, Aryan, what do you want to do?" I was like, I don't know. What do y'all need, right? Where
Right.
do I have the most job security? Because to me, I'm still learning. I don't know what I'm trying to do, and I got into Loads and Dynamics that way.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, that was kind of the way I got in. Granted, I jumped around on that story quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that's a good point that you brought up, because being able to talk to people and trying to find your way in is not easy to do. And us as students, like when we're going through that, we don't want to be like too pushy, but at the same time, we really have things that we're wanting. We want an internship or we want a job. So if you can go into a little bit of detail of what you think is like the proper way. I know there's ways for everybody to approach people like that, but
Mhm.
what method did you kind of use as far as networking? That would be the ideal term in this case. Is how did you network with people?
So as you mentioned, it's kind of hard to navigate that fine line of being annoying versus persistent, right?
Yeah.
And I was always like, I'm gonna be as persistent as I can to get what I need. But granted, like there was a point where I was trying to get into Lockheed, and the guy wasn't responding to me. The guy I got coffee with. Just on a weekly basis, every Monday morning, I'll just send him an email like, "Hey man, how you doing? How's life? Blah blah blah," just to get his attention because he was just so busy. So like
Yeah.
something like that happened to be a good balance where I'm no longer like I'm not messaging him every single day, but just a little reminder like in case he forgot, I'm there and I would like to meet with him.
Right.
Engineers in general, everybody's pretty smart, and what makes you stand out is how you talk to people and how you can relate. Uh, what was it? Over the past month, we hired 2 new engineers at Lockheed, and I was on the interview committee. So I sat through the interviews, and we had 5 different set slots, and I was in the very last slot. And essentially, what me and this other guy were doing in the interview was we're vibe checking. Like that was the whole reason I was talking to you, was just to kind of see how you talk, who you are, like are you just see what kind of questions you ask. And we went down and sat through at the very end with everybody that was interviewing and made a spreadsheet of like, cool, this person had these education, like these things in terms of education, they had these things in terms of experience, and how they were talking to us and how they were relating with the interviewing committee was a big factor in who we chose. So I don't know
Yeah,
if that
that
answers the question in terms of method, but it's more so be persistent yet
right.
not annoying.
Right, and that's like you said, it's a fine line because if somebody's not responding to you, then of course my pessimistic mind is going to be like, no, he doesn't want to talk to me. But it's like he can very well just be busy, and
Right.
it's he just isn't getting a chance to respond to you. So doing it on a weekly basis and just being like, hey, if you have any questions or anything like that, I'm still here.
Right. I'm still
Um,
pursuing whatever.
Right, because if you decide that you want to do aerospace, well, then you should do aerospace.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, I think that kind of leads into the next topic that I wanted to talk about is like figuring out what you want to do.
Hmm.
So I think internships are extremely helpful for that
Right. Right.
because you're able to get a little sense of some of the industries that we have to offer. And so I was curious, I was going to ask you. So you mentioned automotive, among other industries.
Hmm.
That's what I wanted to do as well in the beginning, but I realized it's not what I want to do after I got some opportunities to work with it.
Right.
If you want to talk, maybe there's some people that are interested in automotive. And I was curious to ask you, you had done one internship in automotive engineering, what you thought about it, just an honest kind of review of it.
Sure, sure. My internship was with Denso, and Ford at the time was subcontracting their EV cars that they were developing. They're all out now, but I was in R&D. Went to Michigan, lived there for 4 months as I did the internship. It was cool, but it's not. You're not twisting a wrench. It's not
Yeah,
what you imagine. Oh, as an engineer, I'm going to make the biggest turbo, or I'm going to calculate what the best supercharger is. How thick the pulley should be. More often than not, that's not the scenario. More often than not, you're sitting behind your laptop. What I did in particular was working on the cooling system for these cars. And I was like, here's the radiator. We're going to install it. At what velocity can little pebbles hit it before it cracks? That didn't seem that appealing to me. The perception I had of the automotive industry wasn't that. Granted, I was just my naive 21-year-old perspective on it, but I thought it was interesting. But working in that industry with the Japanese company wasn't really something I found enjoyable.
the perception of mechanical engineers and from TV, from movies, from whatever, from media,
Hmm.
is that you're like hands on, you're super hands on, you're creating this thing, and then you test this thing, you're putting it in the world, and you're doing all sorts of this stuff. But the reality is, you can't do all that in. You have to have specific teams to be doing all that, and so it boils down to what team you're a part of. And then you might be a part of the test team, you might be a part of the design team. A lot of people like design engineering, and it's like you said, it's not that physical kind of I'm turning a wrench, I'm making this turbocharger, or I'm making this engine. You might be designing a suspension component.
Or a very small part of that engine, because
Right,
making that engine, as kind of we were discussing a little bit before, was you have the people that calculate the thermo, we have the materials, you have so many different principles of engineering that goes into that one component that we don't really think about, right?
right,
So you may be doing something small where it's still rewarding, you still may enjoy,
right.
but more often than not, from my experience, for most roles as an engineer, you're going to take 50 classes in undergrad, and two of them are going to be what you do, unless you end up as a loads and dynamics engineer, where that's not the case.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you transitioned into that because my next question was going to be what classes. I mean, obviously you're not using them like extremely day to day, but what classes have you seen, uh, principle wise, theoretical wise, that have shown up in your job?
Right now, design and mechanical systems is showing up very heavily. No, you got to know that stress strain curve, man. Like, I'm not even a materials engineer yet. It still haunts me.
Yeah,
I guess the math tends to show up too. DFQ in particular. Like I deal with eigenvalues and stuff frequently at
Oh,
work.
okay.
Um, what else? Mechanics and materials too, where you're like, how brittle is this? Or stuff like that. Essentially, is kind of what I deal with.
I think you mentioned something about something from systems and controls last time we
Oh, that
spoke.
too. Yeah, system controls in terms of like everything's a spring, right?
Yeah.
So like the dynamics of that, and yeah, it's a little bit of everything. It's kind of hard for me to like try
Right.
to pinpoint because I'm like, oh, this is from that class, oh, this is from that class on like a weekly basis, and it just kind of muffles together.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, as far as pros and cons of your job, I know you talked about it a little bit, things that you like about it.
Mhm.
Um, if you can give maybe like a small list of things that you do like, things that you don't like.
Sure. Things I do like, I think it mainly stems from, I guess number one being surrounded by geniuses. Everybody I talk to is so smart. More often than not, they have PhDs, and they're always more than willing to help you learn, right?
Yeah.
With the same merit, the learning curve is so steep, so steep. It's been almost a year I've been working full time. I still catch myself like I still feel like I know nothing. Where it's validated when I talk to somebody that isn't in that field or where is new to the field. I'm like, oh, it turns out I do know stuff. But just being in that environment is just like, dang, am I stupid? Like the imposter syndrome is crazy. At
Yeah.
the same time, the work is rewarding, but it's all the pros tend to be kind of cons too. I love
Yeah.
learning new stuff. Learning curve is mad steep. I love social networking and socializing with people. They're all geniuses. You get the imposter syndrome. So it's just they all kind of go hand in hand. And Lockheed in general, I've loved working for. There's just so much to do. I mean, even outside the team, we have a thing called Gravity, and it's essentially a whole society designed for new engineers.
Mm.
So we constantly plan. I'm in the social chapter of Gravity, and we just plan stuff. And now I'm working on a Lockheed pumpkin carving event.
Wow.
So
They
just
have
like,
so many events, man. It's so awesome.
oh,
Yeah.
they do. Tuesday night football. We have a rec league.
Wow.
So it's just a lot of different stuff they do. So that's another thing to think about is when you're picking the company you're going to work for is what's the work life balance life like, or if you're moving somewhere for this, how's it going to be? Do they offer services where you're going to meet new people, or is it going to be
Mm.
mainly like 60-year-old engineers where you can't really relate too much on a personal level? Or is it a younger team? Or if it's an older team, do they have avenues of you meeting younger people? And
Yeah.
it's just stuff like that we neglect to think about that are important, especially for somebody like me that moved from Dallas to Denver for this. That kind of depends on who you are too. I tend to
Right.
be a fairly social person, and pretty quickly within moving to Denver, I ended up getting a pretty solid circle of people around me.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, I mean, it just depends. You got to know who you are, and if that's something that is going to be a bit more challenging for you than others. And as engineers, it tends to be, right. We're not the most social people.
That's true. Well, yeah, that was some of the questions that I had. If there's anything else that you wanted to add before I end the call, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll let you go. But
Sure. I guess just a couple of things. Your internships are what dictate where you end up. So make sure if you have 7 offers, 5 offers, 2 offers, or you're applying for stuff, apply for stuff where you think that's what you want to do. If you intern as, I don't know, a test engineer, but you want to get into something that's unrelated to test, you don't have the resume for it, right? But it's going to be much easier for you to get into a test role. So either do a lot and diversify, or just pursue that one field that you like. I ended up doing quite a bit in diversifying, so I had options on what I wanted to do. And another thing, join SWE or National Society Black Engineers or whatever they are and go to the conferences. It's worth the $160 or whatever you have to pay as a student.
for
It
sure.
is, aside from the social events they have and the networking opportunities, just it's so valuable to go and interview. And even if you don't land anything, you learn stuff about yourself. You learn, cool, next time I'm in this situation, I know what to do. Or like these are the type of questions they ask. And like when I went, the first 2 interviews I did were terrible. Not interviews, sorry,
Mm.
like the first conversations I had when I stood in line because I didn't know what to do. I was nervous, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
after doing that 2, 3 times, like the nerves are no longer there.
Right.
So stuff like that, it's good to do. It's good to know. And one last thing, a lot of people such as myself that like trying stuff, After you graduate, you may not have the opportunity to do internships anymore. However, there's a lot of companies that have developmental programs,
Okay.
like Lockheed has ELDP, which is Engineering Leadership Development Program, where it's a 2-year program, 6 months rotation, and each different things, and you figure out what you like. Or I had an offer from GE where it was the Manufacturing Leadership Development Program, where again, rotation program, you're in classes, blah, blah, blah. So that opportunity is still there. It may be harder to get, but keep an eye on it if that's something you're interested in. Like that's something I learned as I was interning. I was like, ooh, that's sick. I want to do that. So